Look at it closely. Yellow skin, curved shape. 59 cents at the grocery store. It seems like the least interesting object in your kitchen, but this fruit has funded coups. It has toppled elected governments. It has been used to justify military invasions, and it has been complicit in massacres that history books tried, for decades, to forget. And right now, today, the exact banana in your hand is quietly dying out. Not slowly, not someday, within a generation. This is the story of how a fruit conquered the earth, how it became sacred to a billion people before it became a business star, and how the very thing that made it perfect may be the thing that destroys it. 10,000 years ago, in the rainforests of what is now Papua New Guinea, nobody was paying attention to the banana. It didn't look like the fruit, you know. It was small, stubby, packed edge to edge with hard black seeds the size of peppercorns. The flesh inside was thin and bitter. Biting into a wild banana felt less like eating fruit and more like chewing gravel. If you had walked past one in that jungle, you would not have looked twice. But early farmers in New Guinea saw something the rest of the world hadn't. Through generations of careful selection, they began breeding out the seeds, favoring the rare, mutant plants that produce more flesh and less grit. Over centuries, they created something the natural world had never produced on its own, a banana with no seeds at all. Soft, sweet, easy to eat. It stands among the earliest feats of agricultural engineering in human history. Older than the cultivation of rice, rivaling the domestication of wheat, but a seedless plant carries a hidden cost. It cannot reproduce on its own. From that point forward, every banana plant on Earth would have to be grown from a cutting, a fragment of root called a corm, replanted by human hands. Every banana plant became a copy of another, and every plantation became a copy of itself. It was a small biological detail, and it would become, 10,000 years later, the single greatest weakness in the global food supply. From New Guinea, the banana began to travel. Polynesian voyagers carried it across the Pacific, island to island, into places no seed could have drifted on its own. Traders moved it westward through Southeast Asia and into India, where by 600 BC it had already found its way into Sanskrit scripture and early Buddhist texts. Arab merchants carried it further still, along trade routes into the Middle East and down the eastern coast of Africa. By the time Portuguese sailors first encountered banana plantations in West Africa in the 1400s, the fruit had already conquered 3 continents, quietly adapting to dozens of climates, centuries before Europe had ever tasted it. Then it crossed an ocean it had never seen. Portuguese and Spanish ships carried banana plants across the Atlantic, to the Caribbean, and to the tropical coastline of Central America. There, in the volcanic soil of Honduras, Costa Rica, and Colombia, the banana found something it had never found before. Conditions so perfect they almost felt engineered. The plants didn't just grow there, they exploded. And that discovery, a tropical accident of geology and climate, would soon attract the attention of men who saw not a fruit, but a fortune. But before this story turns to fortune, it is worth pausing on something the history books tend to skip. Long before the banana was a business, it was a belief. In Hindu tradition, the banana plant is treated not as ordinary vegetation, but as something close to divine. Its Sanskrit name, Kadali, appears throughout ritual texts describing it as sacred to Lakshmi, goddess of prosperity, and to Vishnu himself. Across South India, the entire plant is put to devotional use. Its stalks flank temple doorways during festivals. Its broad leaves serve as plates for consecrated food, still used today at weddings and religious feasts across the subcontinent. During Durga Puja, priests carry the plant in procession as part of a ritual called Navapatrika, in which 9 sacred plants, the banana chief among them, stand in for the presence of the goddess herself. Buddhist teaching found something very different in the same plant. Not abundance, But a warning. Slice open a banana trunk and you find no heartwood, no solid core, just layer folded inside layer, hollow all the way through. Early Buddhist texts used this exact image, the plantain trunk, as a metaphor for the self, something that looks solid from the outside, but dissolves into nothing the moment you search for its center. It was meant, originally, as a lesson about impermanence. Centuries later, it would come to describe something else entirely, an industry built on a plant with no genetic core to fall back on. Keep that image in mind, it will return. In Islamic tradition, a passage of the Quran describing the gardens of paradise speaks of tal, layered with fruit, and some of the earliest commentators, including companions of the Prophet, identified that tree specifically with the banana, its fruit famously clustered in tight, continuous rows. Not every scholar agrees on the translation. The word has also been read as referring to the acacia, but the banana interpretation has persisted across centuries of commentary, tying the plant's single most distinctive trait, fruit stacked on fruit, without pause or season, directly into a vision of eternal abundance. Three of the world's major religious traditions, three completely different meanings, drawn from the exact same plant. None of them could have imagined what this fruit was about to become. In the 1870s, a young American named Minor Cooper Keith was contracted to do something close to impossible. Build a railroad through the brutal interior of Costa Rica, connecting the capital to the coast. The jungle fought back. Malaria, yellow fever, snakebite. Of the first 700 workers Keith brought in from New Orleans, almost none survived the year. He recruited laborers from Jamaica, China, Italy, Honduras. The jungle took them too. Keith buried 3 of his own brothers before the line was finished. The railroad was bleeding money faster than anyone could raise it. So Keith planted banana trees along the unfinished rail line, a side hustle to keep the project alive. It became something far bigger than the railroad itself. By the 1890s, steamships loaded with green bananas were leaving the port of Limon every week, bound for New Orleans and New York. The variety was called the Gros Michel, Big Mike, bigger, creamier, and more intensely flavored than anything American consumers had ever tasted. Its thick skin barely bruised on the long ocean crossing. If you've ever wondered why artificial banana flavoring tastes nothing like the banana in your fruit bowl, this is why. That candy-like flavor was modeled on the Gros Michel. The banana most of the world eats today is, in every meaningful sense, a different fruit entirely. In 1899, Keith merged his operation with a rival, the Boston Fruit Company. Together, they became the United Fruit Company. And with that merger, one of the quietest and most powerful corporations of the 20th century was born. The United Fruit Company did not simply sell bananas. It absorbed entire nations. Within 2 decades, it controlled over 1 million acres of prime farmland across 6 countries. It owned the railroads that moved the fruit and the telegraph lines that moved the news. It operated its own fleet of refrigerated steamships. So vast, it earned the nickname the Great White Fleet. In some territories, it ran the postal service. Workers lived in company housing, bought food at company stores, and were paid in company script, currency worth nothing anywhere else on Earth. The company was not merely operating inside these countries. It was operating beside them and often above them. In more than one Central American capital, the men in a Boston boardroom held more real power than the men in the presidential palace. The term Banana Republic wasn't a metaphor when it was coined in 1904. It was closer to a diagnosis, a description of a nation whose government functioned as a rubber stamp for a foreign fruit company's interests. If a president raised export taxes, United Fruit leaned on Washington. If a government tried to redistribute unused land to its own landless citizens, the company funded the opposition and planted stories in the American press. And if a leader threatened the company's bottom line badly enough, the company picked up the phone. In 1951, Guatemala elected a president named Jacobo Arbenz on a promise of land reform. It was, at the time, one of the most unequal countries in the hemisphere, and United Fruit was a significant reason why. The company held over 40% of Guatemala's arable land. Most of it sat unused. Arbenz proposed redistributing that idle land to roughly 100,000 families who had none, offering compensation based on the value the company itself had declared on its own tax filings. The company had spent years undervaluing that land to avoid taxes. Now that number was being used against it. United Fruit's response was not military. It was psychological. The company hired Edward Bernays, a pioneer of modern public relations, to convince the American press and public that Arbenz was a Soviet agent. It wasn't true. Arbenz was a moderate reformer, not a communist. But the campaign worked. In 1954, the CIA launched a covert operation that overthrew Guatemala's elected government and installed a compliant dictator in its place. The country descended into a civil war that lasted 36 years and claimed roughly 200,000 lives. A fruit company had helped bring down a democracy. And Guatemala was not even the darkest chapter in this story. In December of 1928, workers on a United Fruit plantation near the Colombian town of Cienega went on strike. Their demands were not radical: payment in real currency instead of company tokens, an 8-hour workday, basic sanitation, written contracts that Colombia's government, under pressure from the company and from Washington, sent in the army. On the night of December 6th, soldiers opened fire on strikers and their families gathered in the town square. Official counts at the time claimed dozens of deaths. Later research and union accounts suggest the true number may have reached into the thousands. The government initially denied that anyone had died at all. The event became known as the Banana Massacre, later immortalized by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, who wrote of soldiers loading bodies onto train cars in the dead of night. At the time, it was barely reported outside Colombia. United Fruit continued operating there for decades, as though nothing had happened. A fruit that cost a few cents on a breakfast table in Ohio was, on the other end of its supply chain, connected to some of the most violent corporate history of the 20th century. But the empire built on the Gros Michel had a vulnerability that no amount of political power could protect it from, and the countdown had already begun. The Gros Michel was, by nearly every measure, the perfect banana. It tasted better, it shipped better, it thrived across the whole tropical belt of Central America. But every single plant was a genetic clone of every other. The same strengths, the same weaknesses, no variation anywhere in the population. Plant enough identical organisms across enough acres, and you are no longer growing a crop. You are building a target. In the early 1900s, a soil-borne fungus began appearing in Panama's lowland plantations, Fusarium oxysporum, known informally as Panama disease. It entered through the roots, choked the plant's internal water supply, and left it to collapse from the inside. There was no cure. No fungicide could stop it. Its spores could linger in the soil for decades. The only response was abandonment. Leave the land, move to fresh soil, and hope the fungus didn't follow. It always followed. By the 1950s, the Gros Michel, the banana that had funded railroads, built an empire and dominated breakfast tables across 2 continents, was functionally extinct as a commercial crop wiped out by a microscopic organism that exploited the very trait that had made the banana so easy to grow in the first place: its genetic sameness, a hollow trunk with nothing solid at its core. Just as the old teaching once described, the industry needed a replacement, and it needed one immediately. The answer had been sitting, almost forgotten, in a greenhouse in Derbyshire, England, since the 1830s, a variety called the Cavendish. It wasn't as flavorful as the Gros Michel. Its skin bruised more easily, but it had one advantage that mattered more than taste. Panama disease could not touch it. Within a generation, the entire global industry pivoted. Every plantation, every shipping route, every grocery chain switched over. By the 1960s, the Cavendish had become the banana, the only banana most of the world would ever know. And here is the detail almost everyone missed. It was a clone too. Every single Cavendish on Earth is genetically identical to every other. A different banana, the same fatal design. For nearly 40 years, the gamble paid off. Then, in 1990, a new strain of the same fungus was identified in Taiwan. Scientists called it Tropical Race 4. Unlike its predecessor, this one could kill the Cavendish. It has since spread across Asia, into Africa, into the Middle East, and by 2019, into Colombia, the heart of the Latin American export industry. There is still no cure. No chemical treatment stops it. And because every Cavendish on the planet shares the same DNA, every plantation on Earth remains equally exposed. Strip away the politics, the corporations, the collapsing plantations, and at its core, the banana remains one of the most quietly effective pieces of food engineering nature ever produced. A single banana delivers a meaningful dose of potassium, a mineral tied directly to healthy blood pressure and heart function. One of the reasons it became, decades ago, an everyday symbol of casual nutrition. It carries vitamin B6, involved in metabolism and mood regulation, along with a form of fiber called resistant starch, most concentrated in a banana that isn't quite ripe, yet which feeds beneficial bacteria in the gut rather than being broken down outright. Long before any of this had a scientific name, traditional medicine already knew how to use it. Across South Asia, unripe green banana, starchy, low in sugar, has been used for generations as a home remedy for digestive upset, a practice modern nutrition science now partly credits to that same resistant starch. In Ayurvedic tradition, the banana flower, the deep maroon blossom that hangs beneath a ripening bunch, has long been prepared as a dish believed to support iron levels and steady blood sugar, and it is still cooked today across India and Sri Lanka for exactly that reason. Even the peel, thrown away without a second thought by most of the world, carries its own quiet folk history, rubbed onto skin for generations to ease minor irritation, long before any laboratory studied why. None of this is what made the banana famous. The empires, the coups, the collapsing plantations did that, but underneath all of it, wrapped in that yellow peel, was a fruit that traditional medicine had trusted for centuries, long before it ever became a commodity worth killing over. We began this story with an ordinary piece of fruit sitting on a counter, a fruit that was sacred before it was profitable, worshipped in Hindu temples, woven into Buddhist teaching, described in the gardens of Islamic paradise, a fruit that funded a railroad and then an empire, a fruit that helped topple an elected government and stood beside a massacre history nearly erased, a fruit that traditional healers trusted for centuries before science caught up, a fruit engineered by human hands so completely that it forgot how to reproduce on its own. Twice now, that same design, sameness at industrial scale, has brought an entire global industry to the edge of collapse. Scientists in laboratories from Brisbane to the Philippines are racing to breed or engineer a Cavendish that can survive what its predecessor could not. Some of that research shows real promise. All of it is slow, and the fungus is not waiting. The deeper question isn't really about the banana at all. It's about whether an industry that has already lost everything once before and rebuilt itself the exact same way has learned anything at all, or whether it will simply plant the next clone and wait for the next fungus to find it. The next time you peel one open, remember what it carries: 10,000 years of human engineering, a place in the sacred texts of a billion people, a corporate empire built on a fruit, a history stranger and darker than almost anything else in your kitchen. This has been Roots of Earth. If this story surprised you, subscribe and tell us in the comments whether you'll ever look at a banana the same way again.